This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Nermeen Sheikh in New York with Amy Goodman in San Francisco. We were unable to reach Ayad Amawi, representative of the Gaza Relief Committee, who we were speaking to earlier. We sadly lost audio with him. We'll keep trying to reach him, and if we do, we'll go to him. Amy?
We'll turn now to conditions on the ground in Gaza as ceasefire talks are underway this week. Among the points in President Trump's peace plan revealed last week is that humanitarian aid must enter Gaza as soon as Hamas accepts the proposal. But our next guest argues aid should not be conditional on a ceasefire.
We go now to Alex de Waal, Executive Director of the World Peace Foundation at Tufts University and the author of the book Mass Starvation, The History and Future of Famine. His recent piece for Foreign Affairs is headlined The Return of the Starvation Weapon, the Collapse of Global Norms Fueling the Catastrophes in Gaza and Sudan. So, Alex, we'll begin with the situation in Gaza on the ground. If you could explain the argument that you make about how aid should not be contingent on an agreement to a ceasefire.
So famine is one of the simplest problems in the world to resolve. Historically, famines have been caused by all sorts of things like drought, and crop failure, economic failures, etc. But all current famines, every famine, every episode of mass starvation in the last 30 years or so has been man-made, the result of political or military action. And a set of norms were adopted by the international community, culminating in a Security Council resolution that was voted for, was partly designed by the first Trump administration 7 years ago, that said, among other things, that starvation of civilians may be a war crime, that humanitarian aid should be provided to those who are facing starvation no matter what. And the UN Security Council should be notified and should act whenever this happens, or whenever such an eventuality threatens. And Israel has repeatedly shown, whenever it is put under serious pressure, that it can respond, it can solve the starvation crisis, or at least ameliorate starvation in Gaza in a matter of days, should it want to do so. It is a choice that Israel has, whether to feed the people or whether to starve them. And there is, under international law and under actual practice, absolutely no reason why humanitarian aid should wait until there is a ceasefire and an end to the fighting.
Let me ask you, Alex, before we go to Sudan, in the event that a ceasefire is reached, what exactly needs to happen? What would restorative justice entail? What does Israel and the rest of the world owe to the survivors of starvation and to the families of those who starved to death in Gaza?
So starvation is both a biological phenomenon and a social phenomenon. So the biological impact on children of suffering starvation when they survive is lifelong. The children who have been through this will suffer physical and cognitive harm for the rest of their lives. And there is an obligation on those who perpetrated the crime, and indeed on the rest of us, to give them the support. It is also a social experience. The humiliation, the tearing apart of those social ties is as profound as that physical damage. And so there is also an obligation on Israel, and on the rest of us. And I'm actually publishing today an article in Jewish Currents on this very topic, on the obligation on the Jewish community as a whole globally to repair that social damage that is done to the victims of this planned starvation.
Well, Alex, we want to move on now to Sudan. You point out in your Foreign Affairs piece that Sudan's famine is the biggest and most intractable in the world. So if you could explain the origins of this crisis and what you think needs to be done.
So Sudan's famine has many different layers going back many years, including ecological crisis, a very distorted, malfunctional economy, especially a food economy, the legacy of past wars, which have left many people destitute, reliant on food relief, and most particularly the devastation, including the mass looting and the use of starvation as a weapon by both sides in the current war. So the immediate challenge is to get a ceasefire and to get humanitarian access, which of course doesn't require a ceasefire, but would be greatly facilitated by one. And there is a plan by the US government, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the Emirates, who are the three Arab states being the ones who are backing the different sides in Sudan. And on this occasion, I think the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is essentially doing the right thing in trying to get those states together to push a deal on the Sudanese belligerents. But even if that succeeds, and let's hope it does, there's first of all a huge challenge in turning that into a real peace process, but an immediate challenge: how are you going to get assistance over thousands of miles? This is not Gaza. This is not something that can be turned around in a day, where you have UN agencies standing ready with the resources literally a few miles away. These are places that are hundreds, sometimes 1,000 miles away. And of course, humanitarian aid budgets have been slashed. USAID has been cut to the bone. European aid donors are also cutting their assistance. The UN appeal is only 25% funded. So there is even in the best case scenario, it will take months and a huge commitment of resources and political will to turn this around.
I wanted to bring in Dr. Tanya Haj-Hassan. Alex de Waal points out that in his piece, that the Sudan's famine is the biggest and most intractable in the world. Dr. Tanya Haj-Hassan, a pediatric intensive care and humanitarian physician, is just back from Sudan. Nermeen?
Tell us, Tanya, when you were there, you were in August and September, and what you witnessed in the health facilities where you worked. You were also there last year, but in a different area of Sudan.
Hi, Amy and Nermeen. Thanks for having me on Democracy Now! So, yeah, this past year, I was in Restorative state, which is sort of in the southeast. Last year, I was in West Darfur, so controlled by different parties of the conflict on both sides. And last year in West Darfur, I mean, the hospital where we were working was pretty dramatically destroyed, and the staff were in the process of trying to rehabilitate it. The town where I was working in felt like a ghost town. There were some people who had moved back, and the children that we were caring for in that hospital were suffering from preventable illness, and there was a large proportion of severe acute malnutrition, and along with the complications that come with it that Professor Alex de Waal was talking about. You know, children who are malnourished often have severe immunocompromise. They're more likely to get disease. They suffer from diarrheal disease illnesses that sort of perpetuate the cycle of malnutrition. And then this past time, so August and September, I saw similar things on the other side of the country. You know, a lot of children suffering from severe acute malnutrition. And it's devastating to see, because to get to the hospital where I was working, you drive through fields of agriculture, and you think, how in this modern world, because, you know, I remember growing up and thinking, you know, when I was very young, watching famine in Ethiopia, for example, and I remember thinking to myself, "What, this is something environmental. You know, this is the climate. This is environmental." And you grow up, you mature, and you realize these things are man-made. And I think that's the important point to make. Is that, you know, atrocities in Palestine, atrocities in Sudan, you know, that relate to malnutrition, that relate to famine, are a consequence of underlying structures that enable these things to happen. And you can't have any sort of functional humanitarianism without political systems that are driven by a set of values and principles, and that we apply consistently across settings, not just when it's politically and economically convenient. There are obligations under international humanitarian law that ensure the safety of healthcare workers, the safety of unhindered humanitarian access, including the delivery of food. But at the moment, over 8 million people in Sudan face emergency or famine level food insecurity, according to the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, the IPA classification system.
And Dr. Tanya Haj-Hassan, I mean, you pointed out that in the place that you're in, where you worked, that's actually the agricultural center, and yet children were so severely malnourished. We only have 20 seconds.
Yeah, no, that's true and very shocking. And I think Professor Alex de Waal sort of pointed to some of the structural reasons why that's the case. You know, people can be very poor with very little access to resources that are at, arm's reach. As we've heard a lot over the last 2 years in conflicts throughout the world. And that's why
Dr. Tanya Haj-Hassan, I'm so sorry. We're going to have to leave it there. Dr. Tanya Haj-Hassan and Alex de Waal, Executive Director of the World Peace Foundation. And that does it for today's show. I'm Nermeen Sheikh with Amy Goodman. This is Democracy Now!
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss a video. And for more of our audience-supported journalism, go to democracynow.org, where you can download our news app, sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the daily podcast, and so much more.